My name is Shawnee Lavender. I am the Conscious Moms Coach. I work with moms worldwide to create more peace, joy, and connection in their families. And today I'm going to be talking about some of the listening barriers that we as parents have with our children. So many of you may have this experience of there are times when you say, either to yourself or out loud, you say, "My children don't listen to me." And usually you say it with a lot of frustration or irritation. And I've said it too, and I say it too sometimes. And usually what that actually means is our children don't do what we've said to do. So it's not maybe even about their listening. It's more about what they're doing when we say things to them. Nonetheless, that got me thinking about, well, what about us listening to them? And some of you may know this about me, but my undergraduate degree, before I got my master's, my undergraduate degree was in communication. And I spent most of my professional career prior to coaching in the marketing and communications fields. So I have spent a lot of time on communication issues in my graduate program. I also studied a lot around communication. And it's just something that's so vital. And I really think that one of the things as parents, let me back up. One of the things as people, especially in most Western cultures, like Western European cultures, and US, that would include US, being a descendant mostly of European culture, is that we have a lot of emphasis on speaking. So we practice becoming better speakers and more eloquent. But what we need more practice with is being really effective listeners. And especially in our relationships with our children, like I said earlier, listening is a really important skill for us. And it's one that almost all of us can do better at, and me included. And I'm a coach and I work with parents. And again, I get challenged by it. So I'm going to talk about the three, there's more than three. I'm going to talk about three specific problems or barriers that we as parents have to listening to our children. And then I'm going to talk about how you can shift and change those barriers. So number one, and these are problems, they're barriers. You might call them bad habits. You might call them non-productive habits. Basically, they're getting in the way of really the most effective and meaningful conversation and communication that we can have with our children. So number one are the assumptions that we make or the projections that we make. And they're often about the why our child is communicating. Not always, but often. So let me give a couple examples. So first one is, let's say your child, you pick them up from school, or you come home from work and they're there and they start to tell you about an incident with a friend of theirs at school. So they're telling you, oh, so-and-so did this, or so-and-so said this to me, so on and so forth. Now, for many parents, what happens is in our mind, we make an assumption. They're telling me this because, and the mind fills in the blank. It's like, oh, I know why they're doing this. And so when we make that assumption, what happens is part of our brain turns off from fully listening, because now we have in mind this idea of, oh, here's what they're telling me about and why. And so I'm going to listen then based on my assumption. And so this leads to a second problem, which I'll get to in a minute. But so that's an example of it, is so you start to hear what your child is saying, and then your mind puts a meaning on it, and part of you checks out because, oh, now we're going in this direction, which may or may not be correct. It may be, and even if it is, the point is not necessarily, is it the correct assumption or not? It's that when we do that, we are sort of shifting our mind and our attention in a way that really keeps us from fully hearing everything, because we've already got a frame around it. It's like, oh, well, this is what it is. And so we're not listening as fully as we could. Here's another example, and this one comes from my own life. So my daughter went through a phase of periodically saying, in ways to me that seemed very random and not, what's the word I'm looking for? They didn't really seem to make sense. They seemed nonsensical to me. She would say, "I hate that boy." And she would say it. One example would be, we drove into the parking lot at a local grocery store, and a car was next to where I parked, and in that car in the back seat was sitting a boy, not somebody my daughter knew, just somebody she happened to see as we drove in and parked. And she would comment, "I hate that boy." And when I'd hear that, for me, that language, hate, is a trigger. It's not something I'm like, inside, that's the, why is she saying that? And so I get triggered by that. And so I'm projecting. It's like, oh no, I'm already getting up into my head about, I don't want her to say that. And why would she say that? And so my monkey mind is going a bit crazy. And again, part of my listening ability is compromised because my brain is like, oh, okay, it's this, and here's what I want to say, and oh, that's a bad thing, and I've got to fix it, blah, 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 blah. So again, my listening is compromised because my mind is so focused on what I think it means, what I think it needs to mean, what I need to do, so on and so forth. So those are a couple examples of how that automatic assumption making, meaning making inhibits our ability to truly listen. So that's number one. Now, as I said with the first example, sometimes when we make those assumptions, it leads to the second problem. And the second problem is that we then listen with an agenda. So our listening, in a sense, we're filtering information through that agenda. So let's go back to the example of our child's talking about an incident that they had at school with a friend. So depending on, who we are, our personality, the way we are as a parent, we might go into fix-it mode. Some part of us is wanting to problem solve. And so we're listening then for the information from our child that will sort of fit into our problem solving. And we might even then ask them things really based on our agenda versus what they're sharing. So for instance, let's say our child, in that relating that incident, they reveal that earlier in the day, they had called their friend a name. Okay. So they said, in the morning, blah, 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 Joey grabbed the pencil out of my hand and I called him a butthead. and then later on, here's what happened. So we might, if we're listening with that agenda of, boy, we need to help our child and teach them, we might then use that information and say, well, do you remember how you were saying that, you called Joey a butthead? And do you think that would make him feel upset? And so it's like that now we're getting into, it's like, here's our agenda, when we may not even know why our child's telling this story. Maybe our child is telling us this story to say, hey, Mom, I want you to know about this thing that happened today. Here's the pieces of it. And guess what? It all worked out because I figured some things out that I, didn't used to be able to figure out. Or we got in a big fight, but we resolved it. Who knows where that end of the story is going to be. And so if we jumped in with an assumption about, oh, here's why it's being shared, and then we get into our agenda-based listening, we are missing the whole of the communication. We might be getting bits and pieces of it, but we're missing the entirety of it. And that entirety is what we really want to go for. So that's, again, how problem one can lead to problem two. The other thing with the example I shared with my daughter saying, I hate that boy, is often when we get triggered or there's something strong that our child communicates that we don't like or that is somehow, unexpected or discombobulating for us, then again, we're up here in our head, we're thinking, holy crap, why'd she say that? Or, oh my gosh, is my daughter going to be a bully? Oh, blah, 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 blah. Whatever, because that's the way our minds work. And so now we're up there and it's like, wait, what did she just say? Did she say something? I missed it. And so we're not fully present to be able to hear our children in those moments. So that is really one of the problems when we get triggered, is we just go back into our mind and we're really checking out of the conversation. A third example I want to share, this actually happened this morning. So my daughter woke up and she was tired and she was laying in bed, and she in sort of a grumbly, tired sounding voice, sort of still balled up in the fetal position. She's like, oh, I don't want to go to school. I'm tired. And for me, I could feel right away sort of that, no, it's a school day. She's got to go to school. I have work. I've got to do these amazing Facebook Lives, things like that. And so it's like, that can't happen. I can't do that. So right away, I hear something from her, and rather than staying present to hear it, I checked out for a minute. Now, fortunately, I did some things that I'm going to share with you in a bit about what you can do to stay present and really be able to listen. But what can happen, and what has happened to me before at times, is then if I go into my own agenda, then again, I'm really listening, and I'm listening just for the information that I need. In this kind of example, I'm listening for the information that I think I need to be able to convince her, in this case, that, oh no, going to school is great and you're going to love it and it's going to be fun and that's what we're going to do, and so on and so forth. So it's like here she is with her communication and I'm overriding hers. And so I'm not, instead of her communication having real value, it's like, nope, I'm coming right in with mine, cutting yours off. And that's common. We do it not just with our kids, other people do it with us, we do it to other people. But it's a real common thing where we are listening just partially to get what we need to be able to forward our own agenda and our own purposes. So I want to pause for just a minute because I'm going to look at my phone. So I've got one more problem to share. Before I do that, though, I'm going to ask if either one of the problems that I've already shared, the assumption making or the agenda-based listening, as I call it, if either one of those are unclear, will you post a comment for me? And hopefully I'll see it. I'll look and are there any comments? Yeah, I may see it, I may not, but so I'm going to give you a minute to do that. Okay, right now I don't see any, so I'll just keep going. So the third problem, and this again sort of feeds from the other two and is related to the other two, but it's partial or distracted listening. And that for me is what is really one of the most common, not just with parents, but in relationships in general. And that's really not fully committing ourselves to being with that other person in an open and receptive place. So anytime we notice that our mind is wandering, or we're thinking about, well, what am I going to say next? Or, oh, that thing, I want to respond to that. And, oh, well, that part wasn't accurate. What they said, that wasn't correct. So when we notice that our mind is taking these side trips, off the main route of listening, then that's part of it. Is in my mind, the purpose of listening in the kind of settings that we're in with our children. I'm not talking about listening at a conference or listening necessarily in the classroom, if you're a student, or listening to a movie or listening to a record. I'm not talking about those types of listening. I'm talking about personal relationship listening, and particularly as it relates to parents and our children. That the purpose of our listening with our children is to connect, and to learn. So to connect and to learn. And if we are, or rather when we are, because we're all going to be this at times. So you can give yourself a break for one and say, you know, there are just going to be times when I'm going to be distracted. But when we are distracted, again, which we will be at times, it is much more difficult to connect with our child, and it's more difficult to learn about our child. Now, it's interesting. I think this happens to us as parents too. We often unconsciously think we know our children. So we tune out sometimes, and we do this with our spouses too, or people who are really close to us. You know, we're like, oh yeah, we've talked about this a million times. I know what they're going to say, blah, blah. And again, we may be correct in actuality, you know, oh yeah, I thought they were going to say this, and they did. But that's not the point. The point is that when we're learning, we're more of a blank slate. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if they're going to say this or they're going to say that. So we're coming more as an open vessel to receive the communication from our children. And in receiving it fully, we are really connecting with them, and they're able to connect with us, and we're learning and discovering something. And then that's how we're building that relationship, those bonds, is through that communication. So let me share with you how you can change these habits, because that's, to me, it's good to talk about the things that don't work, and it's good to really understand them. And it's super valuable to then say, okay, great. Well, what can I do differently, right? Okay. So the first, and I'm going to share several things, and it's going to feel like a lot potentially, but hang in there with me. And if you have questions, please post them along the way. Or if you listen to this as a recording, post them. Like I said, I'm glad to engage with people in productive, friendly dialogue. So feel free to do that. So number one thing to do is to change your attitude about listening. So some of these may fit for you, some of these may not, but here's things that I've observed with people as I've taught communication classes over the years, as I've worked with parents. Here are some of the attitudes that I have observed about listening. So some people have that listening is a chore. And we probably all have that at times. There may be times, you know, if you're tired at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, whenever you're feeling tired, you know, it may be like, oh, I just don't want to listen. You know, I'm not up for this. So again, we all go there. And yet that's a thing to be aware of. If you're really in that state of like, oh, listening, you know, eye roll, all that stuff, you're like, that's going to make it hard for you to be open to listening. So you might also have an attitude of, I talked about this a minute ago, there's nothing new. It's like, yeah, here we go again. It's this bored person, blah, 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 that kind of listener. You might also have the kind of listening barrier or attitude of, oh, my child just goes on and on and on. Now, my parents probably had that about me because I was and I am. I remain a talker, as you can tell. So again, yes, we can really have some things about our children that we feel challenged by at times. So it's not saying there's not some reality there. And yet if the attitude that you're coming forward with into, or you're not really coming forward, when you have that attitude is sort of, it's a barrier. If that's the attitude you bring with you into a potential communication exchange, then it's going to be, you know, hard to really connect and be open when you have this, my kid prattles. Finally, this sort of attitude that I see sometimes is, I don't care. I don't care about this. You know, your child is telling you about their favorite show, or, you know, my daughter's into caterpillars lately, or she's talking about them because that's what, you know, there's a lot of them around. And I care about caterpillars, and they're not my number one thing. And yet that's really what's up for her. That's what's really present for her as an interest. So it doesn't mean that, oh, you have to totally be like, oh yes, I love, SpongeBob SquarePants. It's not saying that. It's simply that if you come with that attitude of, I really don't care about this, it's going to be hard to listen. So here's the attitude I would invite you to adopt about listening, is that listening is an act of love. So listening is an act of love. And another way to think about it is listening is a way of giving our attention. So when we are listening, we are giving our attention to our children. And that, as we know in relationships, that's one of the most important things that we all want, is we want that attention in the sense of, somebody's there, they're hearing us, they're getting us, they're loving us, that we matter to them, that we're important enough for them to pay attention to. So that is one of the biggest ways you can fill your child's cup, you can help them feel seen and valued, is by listening. So think of it as an act of love, that it's a one way that you demonstrate to your child, I care about you. You matter to me. You're important to me. Okay? And a second one, if that either is not working for you or you simply want another one to have in your hip pocket, is really listening is a window into who your child is, what they care about, what's on their mind, what's on their heart. And when we talk about really having intimate relationships with people, the way we have them, one of the components of intimate relationships is a transparency and a vulnerability. And so if your child is speaking to you and telling you a story and saying, here's, what, even if they're not telling you a story, they're telling you part of the story of their life for that day or that moment, you are being invited in to them, to their world, to who they are. And that's a huge gift, really a big gift, because that's how you're knowing who they are. And they're saying, in that action, really, they're saying, I feel safe with you. I care about you. I love you. And I'm so grateful to have you in my life. So to me, listening really is a gift that is for both people. If it's two-person, it's for both people who are involved, because it really is a way for, if you are the listener, that you are giving the person speaking, your child, you're giving the gift of your love and attention and your caring to them. And they are giving you the gift of themselves. So personally, this is me, and yet I've really noticed when I come to my listening opportunities with my daughter in this way, they are some of the richest, most fulfilling times, and they really are very connecting. So that's what I'm going for in my life. That's a big part of what I want to do with my daughter and with my husband, is really be connected, because we're not here forever. We're just not. And so this is your chance. And so the more you can take the opportunities to really listen well, the more connected you're going to be with your children, the more connected they're going to feel with you. And for me, those are priceless gifts. So number one shift, going back to sort of recap, number one shift is to change your attitude, or bring an attitude of listening as an act of love. So the second thing that you can do, and these are going to get a little more practical in terms of, actions you can do, behaviors. So is really focus on the person speaking. And specifically, I'm talking about with your eyes. I know you thought I was going to say ears first, right? With your eyes, with your ears, with your heart, and with your energy. And so you want to use all those parts of you, because listening is not just about words. It's not just about words and, okay, I heard that. Yes, that's a big piece of it, right? If you can't hear somebody well, you're not going to be able to listen to them unless you're deaf and you've developed, so it's like, yeah, you can listen in other ways, or you can pay attention to these other pieces. But that's why I'm saying you want to pay attention to what's the energy you feel from this person. What is their face telling you? What is their body language telling you? What's their tone of voice? What's their rate of speech? If they're talking really fast, that either means they're from New York, right? No, it could mean that, but it could mean they're excited or they're nervous. Those are things you can pay attention to really get the other person, to really hear and understand them. So the practical tips I want to share to make it easier to really have the best listening, and listening in the full sense that I was just talking about: eyes, ears, energy, heart. To listen in that full way, first of all, you want to be face to face. Now, I know you're probably saying, well, of course I want to be that. I don't know about you all, but I know there are times, certainly at our house, where people are hollering up and down the stairs, hey, it's time for dinner. Hey, hey, mom, bring me this. Hey, honey, blah, blah. So there are times when we're not face to face. So for best communication and best listening, you want to be face to face with the person. So just realize that it's true. Face to face, much better. Second thing you want to do is really be at your child's level. So if you have a young child, I have a 6.5-year-old. So she and I are not the same height. So if I am, up at the kitchen counter and I'm chopping vegetables for dinner or something, and she's sitting on the floor, it's not the best communication. It's not for my listening, not for my being able to really see her, to feel her, all those things. So you really ideally want to be at eye level, connecting with each other. The third thing you want to do, this sounds simple, it's harder than it sounds, is to pay attention. And so I talked about this earlier. So our minds are going to go, or, all of a sudden it's like, oh, like just a couple minutes ago, my husband came in the room here. He put a note over on the desk. Can't pay attention very well. I don't know that word. He put a note down. And so part of me, of course, I was like, oh, what is that? Am I supposed to see that? Do I need to know that? So I got distracted. And that happens with all of us. So it might be something we're just thinking of. It might be something we see. It might be something we hear. It might be something our child says, that then our mind starts to wander. So whenever that happens, is the next practical step you want to do is just bring yourself back. It's like you notice, I stopped paying attention, or I'm not fully present. I was looking over here and you're there. Just, okay, I'm back now. Okay, I'm here. Okay, I'm listening. And tune yourself back in. And you've probably seen this with animals. If you have pets, you've seen it. If you don't have pets, you've probably seen it either watching videos about animals or seeing animals in other places. We have 4 cats, so I notice it with them a lot. Their ears, right? So, well, they have pointy ears, right? But when they hear something, they're like, whoop, whoop. So they turn their head, they turn their ears. Oh, now there's something over here, and now this ear is listening more, and then, oh, it sounds really interesting. Maybe I better turn my whole thing. So yes, get cat ears. That's always a good tip. But no, the point is that that's a demonstration of when they're trying to hear something, they are paying attention. They're like, oh, I'm over here. That's what I'm listening to, something that's over there. So I'm going to turn. I'm going to pay attention over there. I'm not mostly, if I'm trying to listen over there, I'm not going to just rely on half of my hearing apparatus, turn that way, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't, it's like, well, you can do that, sure, to just catch something. But if you want to listen well, you focus on what you're listening to, who you're listening to. So really just practice that. Again, sounds simple, but it's amazing how much we just are like, blah, blah. So just focus in. And it's not a staring contest, you don't, oh, what? Just be with that person. So the goal, I think, if you want to practice, like if you're thinking, gee, am I a good listener? Think about a mirror, a physical mirror, right? A glass, whatever it is, it's a mirror. And so you look in it, and unless it's a carnival mirror or it's a magnifying mirror, if it's just a regular mirror, what does it do? It reflects what is there, right? So it doesn't, if you have my color hair, which my daughter calls brown, I try and say, oh no, it's blonde, whatever. You know, if you have this color hair, when I look in a mirror, my hair with, you know, natural lighting at least, should not look purple. That would be an inaccurate reflection because that's not what color my hair is. It shouldn't, you know, erase my eyebrows or make my mouth look different than it looks. An accurate mirror gives an accurate reflection of here's what's there. That's what it is. I'm reflecting back what is there. So as a listener, rather than, again, what we often do is we listen and then we are filtering and putting through our own meanings. And so if we say, well, what did that person just say? Let me see if I didn't write down an example for this. So let's say your spouse says, you know, honey, would you bring the dishes to the table? I don't know, a bad example. So let me do that again. So, honey, would you bring the dishes to the table? Now, maybe, depending. For me, what I just heard there a little bit sound like maybe a little annoyance and, you know, just a little bit edgy, right? So I might not the reflective part, but the interpretive part of listening. So I might hear, honey, would you bring the dishes to the table? And I might say to my husband, why are you mad at me? Did he say he was mad at me? No. But I inferred something. I heard his tone of voice, heard the way he was speaking, and I made up a meaning and said, oh, there's something there. Again, might be accurate, might not be, but that is not a mirror. That's not a mirror. A mirror, if I wanted to reflect, you know, just to my husband that I heard what he said, I could say something like, honey, you want me to bring the dishes to the table. That's what he said, right? So a mirror is going to be reflecting of what's there. Now, so I might have said, you want me to bring the dishes to the table. Are you feeling a little annoyed? You know, or I thought maybe it sounded like you were annoyed. So that could be a reflection back that I heard that tone of voice. And so, you know, is that this? So that's one thing you can do purposefully with your child if they're old enough, or with your spouse or with a friend. Sit down and really practice and ask them, you know, can we practice some intentional deep listening? And ask them to help you see if you're hearing accurately in the sense of that mirror and reflecting. So in that, what you can do is really practice. Listen for a short time, and then be able to come back to that person and say, okay, what I heard you say was blah, 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 and you repeat it. You might repeat it at parts, at least verbatim. I heard you say, you know, that you were really happy that, you know, you got a birthday card from your grandma, you know, whatever. So you can reflect that. You can also reflect back the emotion. You know, what else was there? You know, I noticed, or they may have said, so, you know, I'm really excited that blah, blah, blah. But if they don't say it, you could also practice like, okay, so I heard you say that your grandma sent you a birthday card and you sounded maybe surprised. So that could be your reflecting back, and then the person can say it. You could also practice like, that was weird. Okay, so that was very weird. My phone just decided to turn up the volume all by itself. you could then ask them, was that accurate? Did I hear you accurately? Was that correct? So you can basically, that would be practicing getting verification of, when I was just listening now, did I correctly hear you in all the sense of the word? Did I hear what you said? Did I hear what else you were communicating emotionally and otherwise? So you can just practice that. And the more you practice it, what I notice for myself is the better I get at noticing in the moment when I'm distracted and when I'm not listening, or when I'm listening with an agenda, things like that. Also, what I notice is that the more we practice that deep listening, the more that becomes our default. It's like a muscle. We work it and we're like, oh, now that's just what I do when I listen. So rather than, as I talked about at the very top, maybe it's not on the recording though, I'm using this new system for doing this video today, and it felt and still feels sort of awkward because the way it's it's working fine, but it's different. So I'm not used to it. And so it is awkward at first for me. And it is just a little like, okay, I have to think more about this and pay more attention. So listening is a skill like that as well. So it may at first feel awkward to you, and you're thinking, I don't know, I feel stilted and reflecting back what people said, or my mind wanders a ton. It's okay. It's going to wander. Let it, practice it, bring it back gently, and keep learning. So those are the things that I would suggest in terms of practical things that you can do to remove some of those common barriers that I talked about at the beginning. So as a quick recap, the 3 non-productive habits, or the barriers that I talked about to parents listening well to our children, are: number 1, making assumptions or projecting meaning into what they're communicating. Number 2, listening with an agenda rather than simply listening openly to understand and connect and learn. And number 3, partial or distracted listening. So being partly in but partly out in terms of really being attentive and tuned in to our children when they're sharing with us. The things that I suggested for counterbalancing those or eliminating those habits are: number 1, to adopt an attitude around listening as listening as an act of love. So it's a way that you give your attention, your respect, your consideration, and your caring to your children when you listen to them. The second step was really to focus intentionally and consciously on your child when they're speaking to you. And I had a lot of sub ideas under there, but the bottom line was really being present and taking the steps that you need to take to really tune in, so you can hear them, in your ears. You can see them and observe the rest of their communication. You can feel them with your heart and your the empathic parts of your brain to really feel where they're at. And then to gently be able to bring yourself back, because we are all going to drift. That's part of our human nature, is we do get distracted. And so even when we're like, okay, I'm going to be intentional, I'm going to be focused, some little thing will flitter into our mind, and then we're like, oh wait, I'm here. So it's going to happen. So be gentle with yourself, and yet bring yourself back. So like, okay, we're coming back. Here I am again. And then the final thing in terms of the practical something you can do is practice your reflective listening. So take some time to concretely sit with a friend, with your child, with your spouse, and say, okay, I want to practice my listening right now. So will you share and let me periodically reflect back and see if I'm hearing you and understanding you accurately. So the bottom line with all of it is that listening is one of the best tools that we have as human beings to deeply connect with another person. and to really know someone else and get the gift of their presence by listening. So I hope this is useful. And as I said before, please, if you have comments or questions that you'd like to follow up with, you can post those to the video wherever, whether you're doing it on Facebook or on YouTube, you can definitely do that. And if you want to connect around things like this topic more and other thoughts around conscious parenting, I would invite you to look on Facebook for the Conscious Moms Circle. That's my free Facebook group that you can join with moms and dads from around the world. And you can find me on YouTube, Shawnee Lavender Coaching, and you can find me on Facebook, Shawnee Lavender Parent Coaching, or on my own website, shawneelavender.com. And I'm going to check in on my